They said every marriage could shatter in a single moment, and for Leora, it did. On a night filled with laughter, golden lights, and the clinking of wine glasses, she thought teasing her husband was harmless fun. Her friends were watching, smiling, and she wanted to keep them entertained. But when the laughter faded and her husband, Narain, rose from his chair with quiet eyes, she realized too late that her joke had cut deeper than she meant. That night, under a ceiling of glittering chandeliers, her world quietly began to crumble. To everyone else, Leora and Narain were the perfect couple. They had a cozy home in the suburbs, steady careers, and hosted warm, vibrant gatherings. People admired their bond, envying the calm and laughter that seemed to fill their life. Narain was steady, dependable, and soft-spoken, the kind of man people trusted instantly. Leora, however, loved attention. She had a way with words, a magnetic presence that drew every gaze in the room. Together, they looked balanced, his silence complementing her sparkle. But behind that harmony lay exhaustion and distance neither wanted to name. Narain worked long hours, often returning home drained, his tie loosened and his eyes weary. He never complained, believing that providing comfort was the language of love. Leora, though, longed for grand gestures, flowers, surprises, affection that made her feel adored. "You never say much, Narain," she would sigh sometimes. "You just fix things and sit in silence." He would smile softly and reply, "Because I thought actions mattered more than words." She never argued, but in her heart, she felt. Over the years, Leora began to crave excitement. She wanted sparks, not steady warmth. When their friends praised their marriage, she would laugh and say, "If only you knew how quiet it gets at home." Her friends would chuckle, thinking she was joking. What began as playful teasing soon turned into habit. She loved the laughter it brought, the spotlight it gave her. And Narain, who stood beside her at every event, only smiled, never defending himself, never interrupting. That night, at a lavish housewarming party, the air was thick with music and perfume. Leora glided from group to group, her laughter spilling freely, her glass never empty. Narain followed quietly, greeting people politely, his calm presence unnoticed beside her glow. Someone joked, "Leora, how did you manage to tame such a quiet man?" The crowd laughed. Leora grinned, twirling her glass. "Tame? Oh, he's not wild enough to tame," she said. "Sometimes I forget I married a man, not a silent statue." The laughter that followed was loud and bright. Before we continue, please subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from so you don't miss out on our next story. The more they laughed, the bolder she became. "You know," she added, "living with Narain feels like being in a library, peaceful but painfully quiet." The crowd roared again. She didn't notice Narain's posture stiffen, his fingers tightening slightly around his drink. His lips curved faintly, but his eyes betrayed him. They carried something fragile, a quiet breaking. Still, she went on, unaware that every word she spoke was chiseling cracks into the man beside her. Then came the silence. It wasn't sudden, but heavy, like air thickening. The laughter stopped. Conversations paused. Leora frowned, glancing around. Everyone was staring, not at her, but at Narain. He had stood up, his face unreadable, his gaze steady. Even the music seemed to fade as he cleared his throat. "For years," he began, his voice calm but powerful, "I've been the man you all joke about, the quiet one, the patient one. I didn't mind. I thought maybe that's what she needed." Leora froze. The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. He wasn't angry, not in the way she expected. His voice carried no shouting, no bitterness, just calm truth that pierced deeper than rage. "I've worked hard," he continued, "to give her peace, comfort, and stability. I've sacrificed things she'll never know, thinking love was about showing up, not speaking loud. But tonight," he paused, looking directly at her, "I realized I don't have a partner. I have an audience." The words hit her like a storm. The crowd shifted uneasily. No one dared to speak. Her friends who had laughed moments ago now avoided her eyes. "I think it's time," Narain said softly, "to stop pretending this is a marriage. What she wants isn't a husband, it's a prop. And I won't live as one anymore." Then he walked out, leaving behind a silence that roared louder than any applause Leora had ever received. For a few seconds, Leora couldn't move. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Around her, the guests stood frozen, some whispering, some pretending to sip their drinks. The room that had once echoed with laughter now felt suffocating. She tried to smile, to make it all seem like another joke gone too far. But her voice trembled when she said, "He's just being dramatic."
No one laughed this time.
The truth had already escaped, and no charm could pull it back. She rushed outside, her heels clicking against the driveway as she called, "Narain, wait, please." The night air was cold and sharp, burning her lungs as she caught up to him near the car. He didn't turn. His hands rested on the door handle, steady and unmoving. "I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice shaking. "You know how I joke." Finally, he looked at her, and the calm in his eyes hurt more than any anger could. "Yes," he replied softly. "That's the problem." Tears stung her eyes, but he didn't flinch. "I've laughed at myself for years so you wouldn't feel small," Narain said, his tone steady. "I've swallowed words, forgiven things, ignored remarks, all because I loved you more than my pride. But tonight, you didn't just mock me. You erased me." His words landed like stones on her chest. "I was only trying to keep everyone entertained," she whispered. "You embarrass me, Leora," he said. "Not because of what you said, but because it showed who you've become." She reached for his arm, but he gently stepped back. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "Please, Narain, don't do this." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired." For the first time, she saw how much weight he had been carrying, the quiet endurance, the forced patience, the lonely kind of love that never asked for praise. "You wanted an audience, Leora," he said quietly. "Now you have one. But I won't be standing in front of it anymore." Then he opened the car door and drove away into the night, leaving her standing beneath the fading laughter of the house behind her. The days that followed were unbearable. Friends called, some out of concern, others out of curiosity. "Is it true?" one whispered over the phone. "Did he really leave during the party?" Another sent a message that stung more than it helped. "You should apologize, but it might be too late." Leora sat in silence most days, her house too quiet, her reflection too harsh. Every corner reminded her of him. The coffee mug he always used, the chair where he used to sit with his newspaper, the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered in the air. When the divorce papers arrived, she didn't even cry. She just stared at them, tracing his signature again and again. There was no bitterness in his words, no plea, no resentment. Only finality. He hadn't fought. He hadn't delayed. He had simply walked away with his dignity intact. "He's really done," she whispered to herself, realizing that silence could be louder than shouting. People who once envied their marriage now spoke in hushed tones. At gatherings, Leora could feel the stares, the pity hidden behind polite smiles. "It's such a shame," someone would say when they thought she wasn't listening. They looked so perfect. She wanted to scream that perfection was a mask, that love without respect was already dead. But instead, she nodded and excused herself, retreating to the bathroom to cry quietly, not for losing him, but for realizing she had never really seen him. Weeks turned into months. Narain's absence felt heavier with time. Leora heard from mutual friends that he was doing well, working in another city, looking healthier, happier. "He seems at peace," one friend told her gently. She smiled faintly. "He deserves that," she replied. And she meant it, because for the first time, she understood that his quiet wasn't emptiness. It was strength, the kind of strength that didn't need an audience to feel real. At night, she often sat on the balcony, staring into the dark sky. The echoes of that night still haunted her, the laughter, the silence, his final words. "I don't have a partner. I have an audience." They played in her head over and over, reminding her how easily love can die when pride takes its place. Sometimes, she wished she could call him, just to say sorry one more time. But she knew he didn't need her apology anymore. He had already moved on. One evening, months after the divorce, Leora found herself driving through the old neighborhood they once lived in. The streets looked the same. The tall trees, the bakery on the corner, the park where they used to walk on quiet Sundays. She parked near their old house and sat there for a long time, staring at the windows. The curtains were different now, pale blue instead of cream, and there was laughter coming from inside, a sound that used to belong to her. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw Narain through the glass, setting a table with calm precision. But she didn't stay to confirm. Some wounds hurt more when you look too closely. Driving back, her mind wandered to their early days. How he used to bring her coffee every morning just the way she liked it, with cinnamon sprinkled on top. How he would stay up late to help her finish reports, even when he had work the next morning. "You don't have to," she used to tell him, smiling. And he would reply, "I know. That's why I want to." Back then, she thought love would always look like that, steady, effortless, endless. But love, she now knew, needed more than gestures. It needed care, protection, and most of all, respect. Her friends eventually stopped calling. At first it hurt, then it felt like peace. The silence that once terrified her became something she learned to live with. Some evenings, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, staring at nothing in particular. She started writing letters she never sent, words meant for Narain. "I used to think you were dull," one letter read, "but now I see you were just tired from carrying both of us." One afternoon, she ran into one of their old friends, a cheerful woman named Ira, at a cafe downtown. "Leora?" Ira gasped, smiling warmly. "It's been ages." They talked for a while about work, about life. Then Ira said softly, "I saw Narain last month. He looked good, calmer than I've ever seen him." Leora's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm glad," she said. "He deserves peace." Ira hesitated before adding, "He didn't say much, but I think he still cares. Just not the same way." Those words settled in Leora's chest like both a comfort and a wound. Later that night, Leora stood before her mirror, studying her reflection. The woman looking back wasn't the one who used to crave applause. Her makeup was lighter, her expression gentler. "Who are you without the laughter?" she whispered. For the first time, she didn't need an audience to answer. The silence felt like an honest reply. She began learning to find joy in smaller things: baking, reading, tending to the flowers he once planted in the yard. Slowly, she realized she wasn't trying to fill the emptiness anymore. She was learning to understand it. Sometimes she thought about what she would say if she met Narain again. "I finally understand," maybe. Or, "I'm sorry I made you small so I could feel big." But she also knew some apologies were meant to stay unspoken, not because they didn't matter, but because the person who deserved them had already healed. Still, she hoped that somewhere deep down he knew she had changed. Months later, while attending a charity dinner through work, Leora saw him again for the first time. Narain. He stood across the room, dressed simply, talking to a group of colleagues. There was a calm brightness about him that hadn't been there before. When his eyes finally met hers, the world seemed to pause. He gave her a polite, almost kind smile, not out of bitterness, but closure. She nodded slightly, returning the gesture. No words passed between them, yet everything that needed to be said was already understood. As the event went on, she found herself watching him from afar, not out of longing, but gratitude. She realized that losing him had taught her the language of humility, the weight of words, and the strength of quiet love. When he eventually left, she didn't chase after him. She simply whispered to herself, "Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love back." And somehow that was enough. That night, as she drove home, the city lights blurred through her tears. But this time, they weren't tears of regret alone. They were of release. The laughter she once chased now felt meaningless compared to the peace she had finally earned. As she parked and stepped out into the cool night air, she looked up at the stars and smiled faintly. "He's free," she murmured. "And maybe now so am I." Weeks after seeing him again, Leora found herself returning to old routines, but with a new rhythm. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping young couples prepare for marriage workshops. At first, it was strange, giving advice about something she had failed at. But as she listened to the couples speak, she realized her experience wasn't just a wound. It was a lesson. One afternoon, a young woman asked, "How do you keep a marriage strong?" Leora smiled faintly and replied, "Respect him, even when no one is watching." The room fell silent, and for the first time, she felt her words truly meant something. She started journaling, writing not about regret but growth. Her entries were full of small reflections about patience, humility, and love without conditions. "I used to think silence meant emptiness," she wrote one evening. "But now I know silence can be full of understanding, full of peace." The more she wrote, the lighter she felt. It was as if each sentence was lifting a stone from her heart, one that she had carried for far too long.
Seasons changed.
Winter melted into spring, and with it, Leora bloomed in her own quiet way. She no longer sought attention in crowded rooms or validation from laughter. Instead, she found joy in the rhythm of small things: brewing tea, walking barefoot on her porch, watching the sunrise without needing to post about it. Maybe this is what he felt all along, she thought one morning, smiling softly. The peace of being enough without performance. One morning, she received a letter, handwritten, neat, and familiar. Her heart skipped. It was from Narain. Inside were just a few lines. "I hope you are well. I wanted you to know I forgive you. We were two people trying in different ways, and maybe that's all love ever is, an attempt. Take care of yourself." She read it over and over, tears falling silently. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a doorway back. It was closure wrapped in kindness. Leora folded the letter gently and placed it in her drawer beside her journal. That night, she lit a candle and whispered, "Thank you, Narain. Not just for forgiving her, but for teaching her what love truly means, that it's not about winning, performing, or being seen, but about being kind even when no one claps." For the first time in years, she slept without replaying that party in her mind. The laughter, the silence, the humiliation, they had all lost their sting. Weeks later, she began teaching communication classes at the same community center. Her sessions became popular, not because she was perfect, but because she was honest. "I failed my marriage," she would tell them, "but I learned what breaks one." Couples listened closely as she explained how words, even in jest, can build or destroy. "When you make your partner a joke," she said one evening, "you make your love a stage act, and no stage ever lasts forever." After class, a young man approached her and said quietly, "My wife makes fun of me in front of friends. I laugh along, but it hurts." Leora placed a hand on his shoulder and replied softly, "Tell her before it's too late. Tell her your silence isn't strength, it's pain." The man nodded, eyes heavy with emotion. As he left, she sat alone for a moment, realizing that her own pain had become someone else's warning light. It was strange, but beautiful, finding purpose in what once broke her. Months passed peacefully. She no longer feared loneliness. She had made peace with herself. One evening, as rain pattered softly against her window, she made herself a cup of tea and opened her journal. "If I could speak to my younger self," she wrote, "I'd tell her that applause fades, but love built on respect lasts. And if you lose that respect, no amount of laughter will ever bring it back." Her handwriting trembled slightly, but her heart was steady. That same night, she looked out at the rain-slicked streets and whispered a quiet prayer for Narain. Not that he'd come back, but that his days would remain calm, his nights peaceful. She smiled faintly, remembering his old habit of humming softly while fixing things around the house. The memory no longer hurt. It was simply part of her, a gentle reminder of a man who once held her heart and taught her what not to lose again. The next morning, Leora woke up early and watched the sunrise from her kitchen window. The light crept slowly across the table, turning the steam from her coffee golden. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of regret pressing against her chest. She had carried guilt for so long that peace almost felt unfamiliar. "You can forgive yourself too," she whispered into the quiet room. Saying it aloud made her tear up, but it was the kind of tears that healed, not hurt. One afternoon, she received an invitation to a reunion hosted by one of their old friends. She almost didn't go, but something inside her whispered, "It's time." When she arrived, the chatter, laughter, and soft music brought back memories of that night, the one that changed everything. She stood by the door, taking a deep breath before stepping in. Faces turned, surprised but kind. Some smiled cautiously. Others looked relieved. "Leora, you came," Ira exclaimed, hugging her warmly. "Of course," Leora smiled. "It's good to see everyone again." As the evening unfolded, Leora felt at ease. The crowd didn't feel intimidating anymore. When someone joked, she laughed softly without trying to outshine anyone. The old version of her, the one who thrived on attention, was gone. Then, across the room, she saw him, Narain. He was speaking with a couple near the fireplace, laughing softly. There was warmth in his face, not guardedness. When he noticed her, their eyes met for a fleeting second. He nodded politely, and she returned the gesture, her smile calm and sincere. Later, as she was leaving, Narain approached her outside. "Leora," he said gently. She turned, her heart steady but warm. "Narain." There was a long pause, not awkward, just full of quiet understanding. "You look well," he said. "So do you," she replied. He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to say, I'm glad we're both okay." She nodded, tears brimming. "Me too. Thank you for forgiving me." He smiled faintly. "We were both just learning. Sometimes love teaches through breaking." She exhaled softly. "And sometimes healing begins after it." They stood in silence before he wished her good night and walked away once more. As his figure faded into the night, Leora didn't feel sorrow, only gratitude. That moment was the quiet closure her soul had waited for. She turned her face to the sky and whispered, "Goodbye, Narain." Not in bitterness, but in peace. The chapter had finally ended, not with shouting or tears, but with respect, the same respect she had once forgotten and spent years rebuilding within herself. Life moved forward gently. Leora continued her work at the community center, became a mentor to younger couples, and wrote a small book about love and communication. It wasn't about her marriage specifically, but about the lessons she had learned through it. The title was simple, The Cost of Laughter. It became quietly popular among readers who had once made the same mistakes, people who learned that even love has limits when respect disappears. One evening, after giving a talk at a seminar, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your story saved my marriage," she said softly. "I used to tease my husband in front of people all the time. I didn't realize I was hurting him. But after hearing you speak, I stopped. We're healing now." Leora smiled gently, touched beyond words. "I'm glad," she said, squeezing the woman's hand. "Cherish him quietly. Sometimes the love that isn't loud is the one that lasts." As the years went by, Leora found peace in her solitude. She learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. Her evenings were calm, her mornings filled with soft gratitude. She never remarried, but she didn't live in sorrow either. Occasionally, she still thought of Narain, not with longing, but with warmth. He had been her greatest mistake and her greatest teacher. Every time she helped someone else save their marriage, it felt like a small redemption. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled softly in the distance, Leora sat by her window with a cup of tea and her old journal. She flipped to the last page and wrote, "Respect is the language of love. Without it, even laughter becomes noise." She smiled, closed the journal, and looked out at the rain. The world was quiet, peaceful, alive. Somewhere out there, she hoped Narain was smiling too, both of them free, both forgiven. And with that thought, she finally let go completely.